This video is going to go into more details about the Brightspace gradebook setup. Now that I've been teaching for the summer of 2022 for a couple of weeks, I've learned that there are several things you have to do in gradebook to get it to do everything that you used to be able to do a little bit quicker in Blackboard. So I would say, although I'm a huge Brightspace fan and I think in most categories it blows away Blackboard, I do think that in order to get the grades the way you want them in Brightspace requires more work than Blackboard. Having said that, once you get it set up correctly, the gradebook is much, much better than it was in Blackboard. It just takes a few more steps. There's a few more tabs you have to click on. So I'm going to start off here by showing you my Met 103 Honors Global Climate Change course. That the shell was created for me by our tech folks, and I went into my spring honors course. I did the backup archive, and then I imported it, which I've shown videos on how to do that. So all my content is there. So now what I have to do is set up deadlines and categories and such. Okay, so I've shown you in previous videos how to make this neat visual table of contents and whatnot. Okay, so everything in Brightspace is called a quiz. So if it's a quiz or a test, it falls under the quiz category. So I think the first thing you want to do is you want to go into grades, and I have a previous video showing you this. You want to use this setup wizard here and just go through and answer the questions. I think there's like 8 or 9 steps that you have to go through. And then once you're done with that, you're going to be able to set up categories. So in my particular class in climate change, you will see that, I don't want to do that, we want to look at assignments, and you will see that I have 6 assignments, okay? Each of those assignments are a category. I just call them assignment. That's a default category in Brightspace. But then if I click on quizzes, you will see that I have, these are actually tests, and then I have final exam. So in Gradebook, I've actually created a category called tests, and I created a category called final exam. And the reason I do that is because I use weighted average. I don't use points. So the final exam is worth a certain percentage of their entire grade, and all the tests combined are worth another certain percentage of their entire grade. So if you're using weighted averages, you definitely want to create your own categories. So assignment is default for things like homeworks and whatnot. Discussions obviously are default, but quizzes can actually be quizzes or tests or finals or whatnot, depending on the categories you make. So let's go to assignments here, and suppose, let's go to quizzes, and we have the first test here. Okay, now obviously this is from the spring, so I'm not going to have February 13th for fall. So let's say I want to edit this. Okay, so I click on the edit, and you'll notice whenever you come into quizzes, and this is true for anything that's graded, you're going to see several different tabs here. All right, so each of these tabs you're going to have to visit and make sure that the options are set the way that you want them. This is something you didn't really have to do in Blackboard, so this is why I say that it's a little bit more involved to set up your gradebook in Brightspace, but again, once it's done, you're going to love it. Okay, so for right here, so what's up with this weather? That's actually a test. So right now it doesn't have it categorized, okay? So I'm going to click Add a Category, okay, and I'm going to call that Test. That should match any categories that you've made ahead of time. Okay, and then you can go through and do whatever you want here, do save and close. So now Brightspace knows that this is actually going to be in the category of test. Okay, so I go back and hit edit. Okay, and now what I want to do is put in restrictions. Okay, the restrictions are going to be when can they see it, when is it due, when does it go invisible again? So let's just suppose that I have a due date here. We'll go to the fall, and I'm going to have to go back and edit this, but let's just suppose it's September 25th at the end of the day. Okay, so 11:59 p.m. So I want them to have a week in order to take this test. So I'm going to make my start date here, and I'm going to give them Actually, let's do it this way. The 19th at 12:01 a.m. So basically, as soon as Monday begins, the test is open, and they have until Sunday night before the day ends in order to submit the test. So for an end date, the end date is going to be when the last moment they can actually take the test, right? So we're going to, because I don't accept anything late. So the due date and the end date don't have to be the same if you accept things late. I don't accept anything late because they have a week to do it, and I want them to learn responsibility. Okay, so we're going to do 25, 11:59 p.m. Okay, you can, I'm not sure why that doesn't allow me to display the calendar, but that normally is, okay, now this is kind of interesting. Well, you can do your time limit, you can show the clock. Now, this one here is kind of interesting, release conditions. This was something that I didn't know when I first started doing my quizzes in my summer class. My students were saying, hey, I can't see the answers after I take the quiz. And I said, well, I'm not going to show answers until the quiz is closed because other students haven't taken it yet. In Blackboard, all you had to do is say after the deadline, show the answers. But in Brightspace, you have to do some extra steps here. So release conditions, you want to do attach existing. Okay. Quizzes, we don't want to do it that way, actually. Sorry, let's do saved here. Okay, we want to do assessment next. I'll get back to the release conditions in a minute. Okay, so we want this to automatically update in gradebook, right? So if we add a grade item here, okay, we'll just call it chapter 1 test, short name, test number 1, and then here's where you pick the category. To me, that's a bit cumbersome because we should have been able to tell Brightspace when we called it a test, we should have been able to have it know that it was a test right off the bat. Okay, so this is an extra step that I think is a little bit cumbersome. Make sure you always want to check this box or automatically update evaluations. I figured that out when, after students took quizzes, they told me they knew their scores and I couldn't see them in gradebook, and I realized I didn't actually have that box checked. And the reason I think Brightspace does that is because I guess if you want to make edits to test scores before it's actually in your gradebook, I'm not sure why you would do that unless maybe after the fact you saw a bad question, but you could always do that anyway. But for me, as soon as students take a quiz or a test or a homework, I want to see the score in my gradebook. I don't want to wait to the test is over for everybody. I want to see how they're going as they progress through, so that way I can intervene if a student's not doing so well. Okay, so I'm only giving them one try. Anyway, you can play around with some of those settings. Okay, and then we again go back to, now it's a future quiz because it's in the future here. We're going to edit again. And we're going to hit submission views. And this is another new thing that I discovered. Okay, so the default view, if you don't change anything, is that they're not going to see what they got right and wrong. They're just going to get a score. The problem is, you would think the default view would change that status after the deadline to show the questions and the answers and the feedback and which ones they got right and wrong. But it doesn't, so you have to do add additional view, which I think again is an extra step. So you can call this, whatever you want. I'll just call it test 1 answers. You don't have to put a message in there. And now you say, oh, okay, so this test was due by 25th at 11:59 p.m. So on the 26th at 12:01, this new set of restrictions is going to appear. So before this date, students are only going to use the default restriction, which is just see their score. They're not going to see anything else about the quiz. This additional restriction kicks in on September 26th at 12:01 a.m. Now I'm going to say show the questions, show all questions with their responses, show the question answers, show the score out of the possible score. I want to show the class average and the score distribution. And I think that's a good thing to show because Students, if they don't do well on a quiz or a test, okay, they think nobody did well, right? And usually on my exams, in the honors class, I get a lot of A's and B's on tests, but usually there are several students who do extremely well, and it's nice for students to be able to see that it was possible to get 100 or 98 or 96. They just needed to, study more. Okay, so now you can see that there's an additional view here. I don't know how to make this default for all of the tests. I think the problem is because this date is going to change for all of the tests. I wish we actually had this option, and then you could just assign a new date for every test. But the important thing is when you have something that's graded, like a test or a quiz, that you have a category already created before you start working with these quizzes or tests, and that when you go into the quiz or the test, you have to specify that it falls within that particular category, and then you have to use the submission views. After the test or quiz is done, when do you want students to be able to go back and see what they got right and wrong and your feedback? Because by default, they can never ever see that unless you do what's called add this restriction. Okay, so again, I think it's a few extra steps that we didn't have to do in Blackboard, but once it's done, it is definitely superior. So I thought it'd be useful to share this video with you so you can learn from my mistakes in the first few weeks of my summer course.